A story about regret, second chances, and the life you keep postponing. An original audiobook by Mindshift Library. The office was dark, except for the small island of light above Adrian Mercer's desk. He was 42 years old, and he had been at his desk since 7 that morning, not because anyone required it, because it was what the day had become, the way weather becomes rain. He saved the file, closed the laptop, and stood. His coat was on the back of the chair, exactly where he had left it 11 hours earlier. He put it on without thinking. In the elevator, he looked at his face in the polished door and did not recognize the tiredness in it. There was a version of him, a younger version, the one who used to draw houses for fun, that would have found this funny. That version was quiet now. The city outside, when the lobby doors opened, was wet and loud and indifferent. It had been raining since afternoon, the kind of rain that doesn't fall so much as hang in the air, turning every streetlight into a small, soft sun. Adrian walked to the station the way he did everything lately. On automatic, already elsewhere, his mind 3 steps ahead of his body and none of them at home. He did not notice the clock above the platform read 8:50. He did not notice the small sign, hung from the iron rafters, that listed destinations no station in the city had ever used. He only noticed that the train was there, and that it was the last one, and that he was very tired, and that going home was the only thing left. Adrian Mercer had a life that looked, from the outside, like the right one. A partnership in a respected architecture firm, a mortgage on a flat with a view of nothing in particular, a calendar full of meetings that always ended in the same sentence: "Let's circle back." Friends he saw on holidays and forgot by January. A daughter, Sophie, who lived 3 hours away and whom he spoke to on Sundays when the call did not slip his mind. He was not unhappy. That was the problem. He was the kind of not unhappy that is its own quiet trap, because unhappiness would have been a signal, and signals can be answered. But this smooth, efficient, rinsed-of-color existence gave no alarm. It simply continued. On paper, his life was a success story with the emotion edited out. The partnership, the flat, the pension that would one day let him stop. He could recite the achievements the way a museum guard recites the closed hours. None of them answered the question that arrived at 3 a.m. and left before he was fully awake. What did you trade, and was it worth the price? He had trained himself not to ask it in daylight. Daylight had agendas. He had stopped drawing the houses. That was the part he did not say out loud. At university, he had filled sketchbooks with small homes that fit their landscapes the way a hand fits a glove, houses built around trees instead of through them, windows placed so a person might actually watch the moon. His thesis had been about building for the people who could least afford the architect's attention. It had won a prize. A small one, the kind that means someone noticed. But the prize had not paid rent, and the towers did. Then came the offer from Vance Holloway, the firm that built towers for people who already had everything. The money was real. The work was clean. The praise was constant and hollow. And Adrian, at 29, had told himself the small houses could wait. They had waited 13 years. On the platform that evening, he stood among a thinning crowd. A delayed commuter train had dumped its passengers and gone. The board flickered. The last local, platform 11, in 4 minutes. He walked to it the way water finds a slope, and did not notice that the iron rafters above him carried a sign he would only remember later, with destinations no railway in the city had ever printed. The office deserved a chapter of its own, because the office was where the postponing happened. It was on the 31st floor, glass on 3 sides, and from it you could see the whole city pretend to be progress. Adrian's desk faced the window by design. His senior partner, Gerard, said a view kept a person hungry. Adrian had come to suspect the view only kept a person staring. That day had been a Tuesday that felt like every other day. A client wanted fewer windows because windows cost heat. A junior architect, Priya, had shown him a design for a community library, warm, open, built around a courtyard, and Adrian had approved it with a small, warm feeling he immediately filed away. Gerard had killed it by afternoon. "Lovely," Gerard had said, "but we build what sells." Priya had nodded the way Adrian used to nod. At 6, Adrian had meant to leave. The light through the window had gone the color of weak tea, the color of an evening he used to notice. He had even stood, had even reached for the coat, and then the laptop had pinged with a message from Jared * quick look at the Henderson revision. And Adrian had sat again, because Jared's quick looks were never quick, and because saying no to Jared had become, over the years, a muscle he had also let go soft. So he revised the Henderson Tower, which would cast its shadow over a park the city had promised to protect, and he did it well, and he felt nothing, and the nothing was the part he had stopped noticing. At 8, he had answered a message from his ex-wife Naomi about Sophie's school fees with a line so efficient it could have been written by a machine. Naomi had not replied. That too had become normal. He thought about calling Sophie, then thought about the late hour, then thought about the report due tomorrow, then thought about calling Sophie again and decided the thought was enough, which was the precise mechanism by which he had not spoken to her in 9 days. He did not lack love. He lacked the doorway. Somewhere in the last decade, he had confused providing with presents, and Sophie, at 17, had learned not to knock on a door he kept answering with a spreadsheet. He thought about Sophie often and called her rarely. He told himself the calls were awkward, that she was busy, that 17 was a hard age to reach. The truth, which he kept in a drawer he did not open, was simpler and heavier. He did not know how to talk to her about anything that mattered, because he had stopped practicing on himself. The train arrived with a soft mechanical sigh, the doors opening with the exact politeness of a place that has decided not to ask questions. Adrian boarded without looking at the number. He never looked at the number. Looking at the number would mean deciding, and deciding was a muscle he had let go soft. Inside, the air was warm and faintly metallic, the smell of every train he had ever taken home from a day he wished had been different. He found his seat by habit, third from the front, window side, the one that let him lean and close his eyes without seeming to sleep. He did this every night. He had become an expert at the posture of rest without the thing itself. The carriage was nearly empty. That was the first thing he noticed, and the last thing he would understand. It was a weeknight late, and the last train was usually thin, but this was thinner. 3 people at the far end, heads down, gone at the next stop. Then none. The carriage was nearly empty. That was the first thing he noticed, and the last thing he would understand. It was a weeknight late, and the last train was usually thin, but this was thinner. 3 people at the far end, heads down, gone at the next stop. Then none. Adrian took his usual seat by the window, the one that let him lean his forehead against the glass and pretend to sleep. The lights inside the carriage were amber, the old warm kind, and outside the dark was a deep blue, the color of a bruise that has learned to behave. Rain ran down the window in slow threads. Beyond it, the city lights smeared and reformed. He closed his eyes. When he opened them, the train was moving through a stretch of track he did not recognize, not buildings now but open land and a low horizon and a single distant glow that might have been a town or might have been something else. He told himself the line curved often. He told himself this the way he told himself most things, smoothly and without looking too hard. On the seat across from him, where no one had been a moment before, sat an old woman with a cloth bag and eyes the color of settled water. "You're later than usual," she said. Adrian blinked. "I'm sorry." "You're later than usual," she repeated. "But then, you've been later every year." Adrian sat down across from her, because not sitting had begun to feel like a refusal he did not mean. "How do you know my mother?" "I don't," the old woman said. "I know the tin, there's a difference. The tin is where people keep the things they were going to say. Your mother kept yours. She read them on hard nights the way other people read psalms. She told me once, not in words, mind, that she'd have traded the whole tidy life for one of those letters posted." She leaned forward, and her voice dropped to the register of a confession. "You were always going to be late, Adrian." The question was only whether you'd still be aboard when the train reached the part of the line that doesn't come back. He should have been startled. He was, a little, but mostly he was tired in a way that made strangeness feel like weather. "I don't think we've met," Adrian said. The old woman tilted her head. "We haven't, but I've met the letters you never sent. Your mother kept them in a tin under the kettle, did she not? The ones you wrote at university and folded and never posted because you told yourself they'd sound foolish." Adrian's mouth went dry. His mother had died 6 years ago. The tin under the kettle, he had found it after and read them and wept in a way he had not permitted himself since. "How do you?" "SHH," she patted the seat beside her. "Sit. The carriage is empty for a reason. It's empty so you can finally hear it." He did not sit. He could not have said why. But he did not look away either. The amber light caught the lines in her face, and for a moment she looked like his mother, then like no one, then like the nurse who had held his hand the night his mother died and told him, gently, that staying busy was not the same as staying. "The train," she said, "only runs for people who have been meaning to go home for a long time, not to a flat home." She smiled, small and sad. "You'll understand at the missing station. Until then, watch the windows. They show more than weather." Adrian glanced at the window. For a heartbeat, the blue dark outside was not a city at all but a field he half remembered, the hill near his childhood, where he had once lain for an afternoon and decided, at 9 years old, that he would grow up to make places for people to be safe in. He had not thought of that hill in 30 years. When he looked again, it was only rain. The carriage lights flickered, and when they steadied, she was gone, and the seat across from him was empty, and his coat was damp at the shoulder as if he had leaned against rain that was not there. Adrian sat in the empty carriage a long time, the way a person sits in a room after someone they loved has left it. He did not try to explain her. He had learned, in the tower years, to explain everything, to render mystery into memo, and the explaining had cost him something he was only now beginning to name. So he let the impossibility sit. The train rolled on through the blue dark, and the windows showed only rain, and the rain showed only him, and for the first time in years, he did not look away from his own reflection. At the next stop, no one boarded, but the air changed, the way it does before a storm that has your name on it. A man got on 2 carriages down. Adrian saw him through the connecting doors, walking slowly, hands in pockets, stopping at each empty row as if counting absences. He was around Adrian's age, maybe a little older, dressed in the same dark coat everyone on a late train seems to own. But his coat had paint on the cuff. Adrian noticed that, because Adrian used to have paint on his cuffs before the firm gave him shirts that forgave nothing. The man reached Adrian's carriage and sat, not across, but 1 seat over, angled toward the window, so they shared the view without sharing the silence uncomfortably. "You don't remember me," the man said. "That's fair, you were someone else when we last spoke." "Were we at the firm?" The man laughed, a short, honest sound. "No, we were at the place you quit, the workshop, Tuesdays. You were going to start a practice with the rest of us, low-cost homes, remember? You came twice and then the tower job paid more and you stopped coming." Adrian's chest tightened. The workshop, he had not thought of it in years. A group of young architects meeting in a rented room above a bakery, dreaming out loud. He had gone twice. "I'm not that person anymore," Adrian said, and heard how much it sounded like an apology. "You are exactly that person," the man said. "He's just been made to wait in the rain a long time. On this train, the waiting ends car by car." Adrian looked at the paint on the man's cuff and felt a pang he could not name, recognition, maybe, or grief for a skill he had let stiffen. "The workshop," Adrian said. "We were going to build low-cost homes. I came twice." "Twice," the man agreed, not unkindly. "And then the tower job, the money, the logic of it, you told yourself you'd come back when you had capital. Capital is a story we tell to stay in the warm room. You had everything you needed the second Tuesday. You just didn't believe a small house could matter as much as a tall one." He met Adrian's eyes. "It can. The families in mine will tell you. One of their children is named Adrian, actually, after the man who taught the workshop before he disappeared." "How do you know about the workshop?" Adrian asked. "I never told anyone at the firm." The man turned from the window. His face was ordinary and familiar in the way strangers' faces sometimes are the shape of a memory you can't place. "Because I'm the version of you who went," he said. Adrian laughed, but it came out thin. "That's not how anything works." "Isn't it?" The man pulled something from his coat, a small model house, carved from what looked like soap painted white with a tiny courtyard. He set it on the seat between them. "I built these, not the towers, the homes. We got 3 of them up on land the city had written off. Families live in them. Kids draw on the walls. One of them wrote your name on a beam because I told them who taught me the first thing about fitting a window to a sunrise." Adrian stared at the model. It was crude and perfect. He had once known exactly how to fit a window to a sunrise. "You're not real," he said, but he said it the way a person says the floor is steady while the floor is already moving. "I'm as real as the life you didn't live," the man said. "Every carriage on this train is a life, some you nearly chose, some you're still choosing if you'd only notice. And the one at the end, is the one you're building right now without meaning to." He reached into his coat and drew out a folded plan sheet, worn soft at the folds, and spread it across the seat between them. It was Adrian's own hand, the young hand, the one that had drawn a house with a courtyard and written above it, in a margin, * build this before you're too tired to want it. He had written that. He had meant it. He had then, the next morning, opened the email from Holloway and closed the sketchbook, and not opened it again for 13 years. "Real enough to remember your own handwriting," the man said, and Adrian looked at the proof of himself and felt the specific grief of a promise broken to no one but his younger self. The plan sheet trembled in his hands, not from the train's motion but from recognition. There, in the margin, the young hand had drawn a small figure at the window of the courtyard house. A child, held up to see lightning. He had drawn that from memory, from a thing he had not yet lived, as if the future had dictated the blueprint to him before he was old enough to build it. He had been right then. He had known. The knowledge had not left. It had only been filed under *later*, where he stopped opening the drawer. The train leaned into a curve. Outside, the blue dark deepened, and for a moment Adrian thought he saw, far down the track, a station that had no lights and no name. "Why me?" Adrian asked. The question came out smaller than he meant, the way questions do when they have been waiting a long time. "Why this train? Why tonight?" The man considered, as if the question had weight. "Not why you. When? The train comes when the postponing has compounded past a certain point, when a person has become fluent in the word later and has stopped noticing it's a sentence with no verb. Tonight you were tired enough to be honest and honest enough to see us. Most people ride straight through. They close their eyes at platform 11 and open them at home and remember nothing. The train lets them. It only keeps the ones who are ready to get off." He paused. "You got off, Adrian, you just haven't stood up yet." The man left at the following stop the way he had come, with a small nod, as if they'd agreed to something Adrian hadn't yet heard. On the seat, he left the model house. Adrian put it in his coat pocket, where it sat against his ribs like a second heartbeat. A few minutes later, a girl boarded. She was perhaps 19, with a camera around her neck and a notebook full of fast, cert handwriting. She sat across from him without asking, which only children and the very old are allowed to do. "Are you him?" she said. "Am I who?" "The man in the photograph. My mother keeps one. She says if she'd married you, she'd have traveled. She says you were the one who knew how to look at a place before building on it." The girl held out a photograph, worn at the corners. In it, a younger Adrian stood on a hill at dusk, arm around a woman with wind in her hair and a map in her hand. Adrian knew the woman, Clara, the one who had wanted to see every coastline and had asked him once to come. He had said next year. "This isn't," Adrian began, but the girl had already turned the photo over. On the back, in Clara's hand, "The life we almost chose. Don't let him forget." "She's happy," the girl said, and Adrian could not tell if she meant Clara or herself or both. "But she wonders about the other one, the one where you came." The photograph slipped from his fingers and landed face up on the floor, and when he picked it up, the writing had shifted. Now it read, "The life you can still choose. The train is patient." Adrian turned it over. The image was unchanged, the hill, the map, Clara's wind-tossed hair, but the Adrian in it looked different now than he had a moment before. Not younger. Awake. The way a person looks in a photo taken right before good news, when they don't know yet but their face does. He wondered, with a small cold clarity, how many versions of himself had been awake in that photo and how many he had let fall asleep since. He looked up. The girl was gone, and the carriage smelled of rain and something like jasmine, which Clara had worn. He turned the photo over and over in his hands, as if the paper might answer. The Adrian in the picture was younger by 20 years and lighter by a grief he had not yet earned. He remembered the hill, the map, the way Clara had laughed when he said he wanted to build houses that felt like being held. He had said it as a joke, almost, and she had not laughed, only looked at him as if he had told her a secret. "I'm still that person," he said to no one, and the train, for the first time, seemed to lean its weight toward him, as if agreeing. A voice came over the train's intercom, calm and recorded. "The next carriage is not in service. Please remain in your carriage." Adrian had heard that voice on 100 late trains and never once obeyed it in spirit. He stood. The connecting door opened at his touch, which it should not have, and he stepped through. The next carriage was colder. The amber lights here were dimmed to a low gold, and the seats were occupied, not by people but by shapes, suggestions, the way a fog holds the memory of a face. At the far end sat a single figure in a long coat, reading a newspaper Adrian could not quite see. On the walls of this carriage, instead of advertisements, were photographs. They were of a man who looked like Adrian but older and alone. The man stood in a large, empty flat with a view of nothing in particular. The man sat at a desk with no one across from him. The man at a hospital, alone, holding a phone that had not rung. The man at a daughter's wedding he was not invited to, watching through glass. Adrian's hand found the door frame. He wanted to go back. He also could not look away, because the man in the photographs was not a stranger. The man was the sum of every later Adrian had ever spoken. The figure at the end lowered the newspaper. "This is the carriage of the default," it said, and the voice was Adrian's own, aged and tired. "You don't have to choose it. You only have to keep doing nothing. It chooses itself." Adrian's eyes moved along the photographs. In one, the older man sat at a desk on a birthday, a single candle in a small cake, no one across from him, the phone face down beside the plate. In another, he stood at a window, the same flat, the same view of nothing, watching rain he did not open the curtain for. In the last, he was in a hospital corridor, alone, a chair pulled close to a door that had already closed. Adrian did not know whose door. He did not want to know. But he recognized the posture. It was the posture of a man who had spent his whole life in the next room, arriving always a moment after the thing he loved had left it. He retreated to his carriage and did not sleep, though the train rocked him like a parent who has run out of songs. In the morning light, though it was still night outside, the light came from somewhere, a woman boarded carrying a satchel of seeds. She sat beside him, not across, and began, without preface, to talk about soil. "We built the homes around gardens," she said. "Not decoration. Gardens you could eat from. The old woman in the corner flat grew tomatoes up the railing. The children learned the names of things. You designed the first one, you know, the one with the courtyard. You called it the listening house because you listened to the land before drawing a single line." "I drew a lot of things," Adrian said. "Drawing isn't living." "You're right," she said, and that stopped him. Drawing isn't living, but not drawing and calling that maturity, that isn't living either. The life you nearly chose isn't a fantasy. It's a building. It has an address. People are in it right now, sleeping under roofs you imagined. The only difference between that life and this one is a Tuesday you didn't show up to. She opened her satchel and spilled seeds onto the seat, hundreds of them, each tagged with a year. 2013, 2015, 2018, the years he had told himself next year asterisk. She swept them into his hands. They were warm, they were real. "Every one of these is a spring you said you'd plant something in," she said. "Every one is still a seed. A seed doesn't spoil by being late. It only spoils by being never. Plant one," she said, "or don't, but know it was always a choice and it still is." She rose, and the carriage seemed to brighten where she had been, as if the seeds carried their own small sun. At the door she turned. "One more thing. The reason you didn't show up to the workshop wasn't the money. You knew that. It was the fear that if you built the small house and it was good, you'd have to admit the tower was never yours. Courage isn't the absence of that fear. It's building anyway, with the fear still in the room." Then she was gone, and the seeds in his palm had cooled to the temperature of an ordinary evening, and Adrian closed his hand around them as if closing around a promise he had only just learned to read. The train slowed at a station with a name Adrian read and did not recognize. Mercy. Naomi stepped on. His ex-wife. Not as she was now, exactly, but as she had been the last time he'd really looked at her, tired in a way he had caused, still kind in a way he had not deserved. She sat across from him with the careful distance of two people who had loved each other and then built a wall neat enough to call civilized. "I got your message about Sophie's fees," she said. "Efficient, as always." I was trying to be helpful. You were trying to be done. She said it without heat. That was the worst part. Adrian, do you remember why we bought the flat with the small kitchen and the big window? You said the window was for watching storms. You used to watch storms with her. With Sophie. You'd hold her up so she could see the lightning and you'd both laugh like the noise was yours. Adrian remembered the flat's window now, how it had filled, over the years, with the reflection of a laptop instead of a sky. He had stopped opening the curtain. He had told himself the view was nothing, and then stopped checking whether that was true. He remembered. He had not remembered in years, and now it arrived whole, a physical thing, the weight of a small child at a window, the two of them lit blue. You stopped bringing her to the window, Naomi said. Not all at once. A little less each year, until the storm came and went and neither of you noticed. I didn't leave because you were busy. I left because you were absent in a room you were standing in. The train door closed. Mercy Station receded. Naomi did not get off. She simply faded, the way the old woman had, leaving the scent of the jasmine Clara wore, which Naomi had never worn, which meant the train was mixing his losses the way a river mixes rain. But before she went, she said one last thing, and it was not angry, which was the part that undid him. I'm not here to make you feel bad, Adrian. I left because I was lonely next to you. Remember that. Lonely, not alone. There's a difference, and you taught me it. Then she was gone, and the seat where she had sat held only the faint impression of a coat, and the word mercy on the receding sign flickered once, as if the station itself were trying to tell him something he already knew. The carriage dimmed, the amber held its breath. A door at the far end opened, and a young woman walked in, tall, composed, with his mother's eyes and Clara's stubborn chin. She sat across from him and said, without preamble, Dad, you came. Adrian's breath left him. Sophie. Sophie at 31, she said. You don't know me like this yet. In your time I'm 17 and you're 3 hours and a phone call away. In mine, you're the man who finally showed up or the man who finally didn't. There are two of me on this train, you know, the one you're raising, and the one you're about to become responsible for. She slid a phone across the table. On the screen, a message draft unsent from her to him. Dad, can we talk? I miss the storms. The timestamp was 2 years from now. Here's the version you're building, she said, and the window behind her showed a future flat, clean and cold, where an older Adrian ate alone and a framed photo of Sophie at graduation faced the wall. You don't hate it. That's the cruelty. You get used to it. You call it peace. But somewhere in you, the version of you who used to draw houses is still awake, and he's cold, and he's waiting for you to come back for him. She reached across and took his hand. Her hand was warm and real and impossible. The other version, she said, the one where you call on a Tuesday, not a Sunday, he exists too. He's the one I'm talking to right now. Choose him. It's not too late. It's only ever too late if you let the train take you all the way home without getting off. Adrian felt the years between them, the missed calls, the unopened messages, the storms he had watched alone condense into a single point of pain behind his eyes, and then loosen, the way a knot gives when you stop pulling. I'm sorry, he said, and Sophie at 31 shook her head. Not to me, she said. To him. She nodded at the window, at the cold flat, at the version of himself he had been quietly building. He's the one waiting. She stood to go, then hesitated, a hand on the seat back. One more thing, the other version of me, the one in the warm house, the one whose dad calls on Tuesdays, she's not a fantasy either. She's just a Sophie who got a different set of Tuesdays. You're the only one who decides which Tuesdays she gets. That's heavy. I know. But it's also the only power that was ever yours, and you gave it away a little each year thinking it was responsibility. She smiled, and it was Naomi's smile exactly, the one Adrian had married. You can have it back. The train's just the reminder. The rest is the walking. The train rushed through a long dark, and in that dark Adrian finally understood the shape of the thing. Every passenger had been him, his letters, his roads not taken, his wife, his daughter, the self he'd parked. The train was not a vehicle. It was the distance between a person and the life they keep postponing, made visible and given seats. And the cost of waiting, he saw now, was not a single loss. It was compound. Each, later, borrowed from a future self who had no say. The houses not built became families not housed. The calls not made became a daughter who learned not to reach. The The storms unwatched became a flat with a view of nothing in particular. He thought of Jared's phrase, "let's circle back," and realized the circle never closed. It only widened until the center, the self, was a small distant dot you could no longer find. "We circle back," Adrian whispered, "and we never arrive." The train seemed to hear him. It slowed. A station appeared outside, small and unlit, with a sign that flickered between two words. One read home, the other read, and this was the part that made his throat close, your life. He understood then the cruelty and the mercy of it. The two words were the same station. You could step off into the flat with the view of nothing and call it home, or you could step off into the small house with the courtyard and call it life, and the platform was identical. The difference was only in which door you opened, and whether you opened it now or filed it under asterisk later asterisk. The sign did not tell you which was which. It only showed you that you had been at this station for years without ever getting off. The intercom, the recorded calm voice, spoke once more. "This is the missing station. It appears only to those who have a choice left. You may disembark, or you may remain seated, and the train will deliver you, as always, to the life you have been given." Adrian stood. The door opened onto a platform that was not on any map he knew. The rain had stopped. The air was the clear cold of a decision. On the platform bench sat a young man, 22 maybe, with paint on his cuffs and a sketchbook open to a house that fit its hill like a hand fits a glove. The young man looked up. "Took you long enough," he said, and it was Adrian's own voice, the one from the workshop, the one from before the towers. "I'm sorry," Adrian said, and meant it for everything. "You don't have to be sorry, you have to be early for once." The young man closed the sketchbook and stood. "The train will keep running for people who don't get off, but you're here, at the missing station. That means you still can." "Can what?" "Choose." The young man pointed down the platform, where two tracks split. One curved back into the blue dark, toward the flat with the view of nothing. The other opened into a faint, warm light, and Adrian could just make out, at the end of it, a small house with a courtyard and someone, a child, a wife, waving from a window. "The other track," Adrian said, "is that real?" "It's as real as you let it be. The train shows you the life you're building by default. This track shows you the one you build on purpose. Same materials, different hands." "You make it sound simple." "I make it sound like a choice because it is one, simple and not easy. The hard part was never the building. The hard part was admitting the tower was never yours and staying anyway because it was warm. Leaving takes more courage than you've spent, but you're standing at the missing station, which means some of that courage has already shown up." He tapped the sketchbook. "This is the blueprint of the life you nearly chose. It's still choosable. You just have to stop calling it later." The bell rang. The train sighed, ready to leave. The young man stepped back toward the carriage, then paused. "One thing, when you get home, the real home on the real line, don't look for a sign, be the sign, call her, draw the house. Quit the tower or don't, but build the small one too. The train only brought you here, you have to walk the rest." The doors began to close, and for a breath Adrian thought he had missed it, thought the blue dark would take him after all. Then the young man's hand shot through the narrowing gap and pressed something into his, the soap model house, warm from his pocket. "Keep it," he said, "so you remember you already know how." The doors sealed. The train pulled away into the dark, and Adrian stood on the platform holding the small white house, and the cold of the decision was not cold at all. It was the first warm thing he had felt in years. Adrian did not board again. He stepped back onto the platform as the doors shut, and the train pulled away into the dark. And as it went he saw, through the windows of the last carriage, all of them at once. The old woman, the painter, Clara's girl, Naomi, Sophie at 31, the younger self sitting calmly, watching him go, as if they had been waiting their whole lives for him to finally stand up. The platform was silent, then a voice beside him, gentle and finished, "You understand now." The conductor stood there, an older man in a uniform from no railway Adrian knew, with a badge that read simply Station Master. "The train," the conductor said, "runs for anyone who has postponed a life. It finds you at the end of a day like tonight when the excuses have worn thin. Most people sleep through it. A few wake, you woke." "Is it real?" Adrian asked. "Any of it?" The conductor smiled. "Is the life you've been living real? You chose it, so did the other one. Reality is just the story you keep telling by doing. You can tell a new one. The train doesn't make it for you. It only shows you the pen was in your hand the whole time. How do I get back to the real line? You never left it. The conductor gestured, and the blue dark parted, and Adrian saw the ordinary platform 11, the ordinary board, the ordinary rain, and his own reflection in the glass, older, tired, but standing, truly standing, for the first time in the memory of his body. He looked at the reflection a long moment. The man in the glass was the same man who had boarded, same coat, same tired eyes, and yet not the same, because the weight he had been carrying had shifted from his shoulders to his hands, where a weight can become a tool. "Am I awake?" Adrian asked. The conductor smiled the way people smile at questions they have heard 1,000 times. "You're as awake as you choose to be now. The rest is up to the walking." He touched the brim of his cap and stepped back into the dark, and the dark received him without a sound, as if he had been made of it all along. He was on the real train now, or back on it, the seats hard and familiar, the amber light the cheap kind. A woman sat beside him, dozing, and Adrian felt a tenderness he had not permitted himself in years. For her, for the stranger, for the whole tired human cargo of a late train. He looked at her, really looked, the way he had not looked at another person in a long time, and saw the particular exhaustion of someone carrying a life they hadn't chosen either, and he wanted, suddenly and without irony, to say something kind. He did not because the moment passed, but the wanting was new, and the wanting was the point. At the seat by the door sat one last passenger he had not seen board, a girl of 17, headphones in, sketching in a notebook. She looked up and met his eyes, and he knew her. "Sophie," he said quietly, so as not to startle the dozing woman. The girl smiled, his smile Naomi's eyes. "Hi, Dad." She said it easily, the way she used to before the distance. "You look different, like you're actually here." "I'm here," he said, and for the first time in a long time he was. She went back to her sketch. After a while she turned the notebook to him. It was a house, small, with a courtyard, windows placed to catch a sunrise. "I've been drawing this," she said. "I don't know why, feels like someone taught me once." Adrian looked at his daughter, and at the model house still in his coat pocket, and at the rain on the window that was only rain, and he understood the last mysterious thing. The train had not given him a new life. It had given him back the one he'd been avoiding, the one that required him to be present in a room he was standing in. "Teach me," Sophie said. "Yeah," Adrian said, "I'll teach you." The train slowed for his stop. The doors opened. Adrian stood, the model house in one pocket, the seat in the other, and for a moment he looked back down the carriage at the empty seats where his past and future had sat, and he nodded to them, a small, private goodbye to the man who had been asleep. Then he stepped onto the platform, into the ordinary rain, into the life that was still his to live. Sophie walked beside him to the barrier, and neither of them hurried, which was itself a kind of miracle. At the gate she hugged him, quick, almost shy, and was gone into the crowd. Adrian stood a moment longer, the seed warm in his palm, and then he walked home not as a man returning from a trip, but as a man finally leaving one. The train approached the final stop. Adrian's stop. Home, in the ordinary sense, the flat with the view of nothing in particular, the unanswered messages, the life on autopilot. But he had a choice now, and the choice was not mystical. It was small and practical and entirely his. He could walk in, pour the same drink, open the same laptop, answer the same email, and call it Tuesday. Or he could walk in, set the laptop down, and call his daughter not on Sunday, not efficiently, but now on a Tuesday, because Tuesdays are when lives are actually lived. He could open the old sketchbook. He could tell Priya the library design was worth fighting for. He could, perhaps, begin again the small practice, the listening house, the homes that fit their landscapes. The seed in his pocket was warm against his thigh, a small argument with no words. He thought of Gerard, of the firm, of the towers that paid for the flat with the view of nothing. He would not quit tomorrow. Quitting was a drama, and dramas were how postponers pretended to change while changing nothing. No, he would stay, and he would build the small house on the side, the way the young man on the platform had, the way the woman with the seeds had. He would let the two lives occupy the same hands, until one of them grew heavier. The train slowed, the doors opened, the dozing woman stirred and left. Sophie stood, slung her bag, and before stepping off turned and said, "Don't disappear again, okay?" "I won't," Adrian said, and meant it the way you mean a promise to a person you've finally decided to love. He stepped onto the platform. The train pulled away. And on the seat where Sophie had sat, he found a single seed, tagged with no year at all, only the word now. He picked it up. It was heavier than a seed should be, as if it carried all the springs he had deferred. For a moment, he almost set it down, the old reflex, the one that filed everything under asterisk later, but his hand closed around it instead, and he put it in his pocket beside the small white model house, and the two sat there together like a promise and the proof that he could keep one. The platform was ordinary again. The rain was ordinary. The city's distant lights were ordinary. And Adrian, for the first time in 13 years, walked toward the exit not as a man returning from a trip, but as a man finally leaving one. Home was the same flat, but Adrian did not go to the laptop. He went to the window, the one with the view of nothing in particular, which tonight, because of rain and city light, looked like something after all. He set the model house on the sill beside the seed. He called Sophie. She answered on the second ring, surprised, pleased, mid-homework. They talked for 40 minutes about nothing and everything, and he told her about the house he used to draw, and she told him about the one she was drawing, and neither of them mentioned that it was a Tuesday, only that it was good. He did not quit his job that night. He did not become a new man by morning. The next day would still have its Gerards and its circling backs, but he opened the sketchbook. He drew one window, placed for a sunrise. He wrote one email to Priya, "Let's fight for the library." He left the seed on the sill where he would see it, a small, warm argument against the default. And when the 3 a.m. question came, what did you trade and was it worth the price? He did not wave it away with daylight's agendas. He let it sit at the window beside the model house and the seed, and for the first time he answered it honestly. He had traded the small houses for the tall ones, and the trade had bought comfort and cost him presents, and the price was real, but the account was not closed. You can still make a deposit. You make it on a Tuesday. You make it by drawing the window, calling the daughter, fighting for the library. The train had not given him a new life. It had only shown him the pen was in his hand and that the page was not yet full. And the clock, the one above the platform he had not noticed boarding, the one that had read 8:50, he saw it again the next evening, on his way to a different train, the one that would take him to Sophie's for the weekend. The clock read 8:50 still. Or maybe it had always read 8:50, the hour when the last train leaves and the choice remains. Adrian smiled, he boarded. He was going home, not to the flat, but to the life. And the clock above the platform, the one that had read 8:50 since the night he first boarded, ticked forward 1 second, as if time, having waited for him patiently all these years, had at last been given permission to move. Adrian did not sleep much. He sat at the window of the flat with the view of nothing, the model house on the sill, the seed beside it, and the first gray light coming up the way it always had, only tonight it looked less like nothing and more like a sky he had stopped bothering to watch. At 7, he did the ordinary thing first, coffee the way a person builds a bridge one plank at a time. Then he opened the sketchbook. The young hand's courtyard house was still there, faint from disuse, and he drew over it slowly, the way you relearn a language you once spoke fluently. A window for a sunrise. A tree kept, not cut. A door wide enough for a child. At 8, he called Sophie. She answered on the second ring, still in pajamas by the sound of it, surprised and pleased and suspicious in equal measure. "Dad, everything okay?" "Everything's fine," he said, and meant the fine the way it's meant in a house with the curtains open. "I was thinking about the storms. Remember when we used to watch them? I was thinking we could do that again. This weekend. At my place or yours, wherever the lightning is." A pause then. "Yeah, okay. Yeah, I'd like that." They talked for 40 minutes about nothing and everything, and he told her about the small houses he used to draw, and she told him she'd started sketching too, and neither of them mentioned that it was a Tuesday, only that it was good, and that the phone, when he finally set it down, felt lighter than it had in years. He looked at the model house. He looked at the seed. He looked at the window, and this time he opened the curtain all the way, and the city outside was ordinary and real and his, and he understood the last thing the train had been trying to tell him, that the missing station was never a place on the line. It was this: a Tuesday, a window, a call. The life choosing itself one small deliberate act at a time. He picked up the seed, tagged with no year, only now, and set it on the sill where the morning could reach it. Then he drew the next window, and the next. By 10, the email to Priya was sent, and the reply came faster than he expected. Yes, let's fight for it. I kept the drawings. He read it twice, and something in his chest that had been clenched since the Henderson Tower loosened by a degree. Not a transformation. A permission. The kind you give yourself after years of waiting for someone else to hand it to you. He thought of the old woman on the train, and the painter with paint on his cuff, and Clara's girl, and Naomi, and Sophie at 31 who had told him to be early for once. They had not been visitors. They had been himself, arriving from the directions he'd abandoned, to walk him back to the one door he kept calling later. He wondered how many other people rode that train: the nurse who stayed too late, the parent who missed the recital, the friend who never sent the letter, and whether each of them, like him, woke on the ordinary platform with a seed in their pocket and a life they could still choose. The flat was the same flat, the view was the same view, but the curtain was open, and the sketchbook was open, and the phone, for once, held a conversation instead of a to-do list. Adrian Mercer, at 42, boarded no train that morning and went nowhere at all, which is precisely why, for the first time, he had finally arrived. If you are reading this and recognizing the train, know this: it finds everyone who has postponed a life. It runs quietly at the end of the days that felt like weather. Most of us sleep through it. A few of us wake. You do not need a ticket you cannot afford. You need only to stand at the missing station and choose the track that opens into the warm light, not because it is easy, but because the other track chooses itself, and it chooses a life watched from a window you stopped looking through. The houses are still drawable. The calls are still callable. The storms are still coming, and someone you love would still like to watch them with you. The train is patient, but your life is not the train. Your life is the platform and the choice and the walk after. Bored when you're ready. But if you're honest, and the train only appears to the honest, you've been ready for a while. Step off. Plant the seed marked now. Go home. And if, years from now, you find yourself on a late train again, tired in that familiar way, look up from the screen. There may be a girl with a camera, or an old woman with a cloth bag, or simply the empty seat across from you, waiting. They are not ghosts. They are the parts of you that refuse to be postponed entirely, and they have been riding with you the whole time, patient as the rails. You do not have to be brave all at once. You only have to be brave at the missing station, once, and then again the next day in the smaller ways. That is the whole secret the train carries, and now you carry it too. And if you are wondering whether any of this is real, whether the train exists, whether the passengers were ghosts or grief or the imagination of a tired man, know that it does not matter. The only station that has ever been real is the one you're standing on, with the seat in your pocket and the people you love somewhere ahead of you, waiting to be reached. The train was only ever a way of telling you what you already knew the moment you boarded, that you are not too late, that you have not missed the life. That the last train home is not the one that takes you back. It is the one that finally lets you off. At the end,